Hermann Göring kept a handwritten inventory of every painting he stole, room by room, wall by wall. 2 Renoirs in the dining room, a Botticelli above the fireplace. It reads like a decorator's notebook, the kind of document an interior designer might leave behind after staging a mansion for sale. But it was actually something else entirely. An inadvertent confession, a twisted treasure map documenting the largest private art heist in history. The inventory catalogued 1,400 artworks with precise location details. Every entry documented a theft, tracked through Nazi occupation like coordinates on a crime scene map. The Allies found it in 1945, tucked away among Göring's personal effects. And what happened next reveals a truth about Nazi looted art that most people have never heard, because the real crime didn't end when the war did. 3 paintings a week. At the height of his looting operation, Hermann Göring acquired roughly 3 paintings per week. Not purchased, acquired, seized, confiscated, stolen under the cover of occupation law and racial policy. Between 1940 and 1942, while Europe burned, Göring built an art collection that would rival any museum in the world. He visited the Jeu de Paume warehouse in Paris 20 times. The warehouse had become a sorting facility for confiscated Jewish art. Thousands of paintings, sculptures, and antiquities stripped from families who had fled or been deported. Göring would walk through the rows like a man browsing a department store, pointing at pieces he wanted delivered to his estates. The curators had no choice but to comply. By the war's end, his collection had grown to 4,263 pieces. In 1945 dollars, the value exceeded $200 million. Adjusted for today, that's roughly $2.9 billion worth of art in one man's possession. But Göring wasn't just stealing for himself. He was competing, directly and obsessively, with Adolf Hitler for the title of Europe's greatest collector. Hitler planned a massive museum in his hometown of Linz, Austria, a temple to Germanic culture built on the bones of Jewish collections. Göring wanted to match him, piece for piece. At least half of Göring's collection came from looted Jewish property, and the paper trail proves it. In July 1940 alone, he seized more than 800 artworks from the Goudsticker Gallery in Amsterdam. Jacques Goudsticker had been one of the most prominent art dealers in Europe until he fled the Nazi invasion and died in an accident at sea. His widow survived. His gallery did not. 300 of those paintings went directly to Göring's personal walls. The rest disappeared into the Nazi bureaucracy, traded, sold, or gifted to other officials. This wasn't collecting. It was industrial-scale theft with a decorating budget. The walls were still warm. By January 1945, the collection that had taken years to assemble started moving in a matter of weeks. Soviet forces were closing in from the east. Allied bombers controlled the skies, and Hermann Göring knew that everything he had stolen could be lost, or worse, returned. He frantically transferred artworks to Austrian salt mines and Bavarian tunnels, locations the Nazis believed were beyond Allied reach, climate-controlled bunkers, underground vaults, anywhere that might survive the collapse that everyone now saw coming. But he couldn't save everything. Some pieces were too large to move, others were too far from the evacuation routes, and time was running out faster than anyone expected. On April 20th, 1945, Göring fled Karinhall, his sprawling estate north of Berlin. The property featured a 34-metre gallery, purpose-built to display his collection. The walls had held Botticellis, Rembrandts, and Van Goghs in climate-controlled luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung above parquet floors. It was a museum disguised as a home, built to showcase stolen masterpieces while European Jews were being systematically murdered. 8 days later, 80 aircraft bombs collapsed the mansion into its own cellar. Göring had ordered the destruction himself. If he couldn't keep the estate, no one would. Whatever art remained inside was deliberately destroyed by the man who called himself a collector. The exact number of lost masterworks remains unknown. The inventory only tells us what was there. It doesn't tell us what survived. If you're finding this story as disturbing as it should be, subscribe so you don't miss our other deep dives into the hidden aftermath of World War II. The train that couldn't outrun history. What Göring could save, he loaded onto a private train heading south toward Berchtesgaden, the Alpine region where Nazi leadership planned to make its final stand. The cars were packed with paintings, sculptures, tapestries, and crates of smaller valuables. A mobile museum fleeing across a dying empire. But Germany was collapsing faster than the train could move. Rail lines were bombed. Bridges were destroyed. The organised retreat turned into chaos as military discipline dissolved, and local populations realised the war was truly lost. When American forces finally intercepted the train, they found the aftermath of a free-for-all. Local peasants and retreating soldiers had already swarmed the unguarded cars, grabbing whatever they could carry. Schnapps, jewellery, furniture, anything portable had been taken. Some crates had been pried open and picked through. Others sat untouched, their contents unknown to the looters who passed them by. Art recovery teams spent years tracking down pieces that had scattered across the Bavarian countryside. A painting here, a sculpture there, recovered from farmhouses and village homes where locals had hidden their finds. Some items were returned voluntarily, others were confiscated during investigations. But much of what vanished from that train was never seen again. The organised theft of the Nazi regime had become disorganised theft by everyone else. And in the confusion, the line between recovery and loss became impossible to draw. 8 degrees below the mountains. The Monuments men found the mother lode at Altaussee, a salt mine buried 800 metres underground in the Austrian Alps. The mine had been used for centuries to extract salt, its tunnels naturally maintaining a constant temperature of 8 degrees Celsius. Perfect conditions for preserving organic materials like canvas, wood and paper. The Nazis had recognised this immediately. When they needed a secure location for the Reich's most valuable stolen art, Altaussee became the obvious choice. And what the Monuments men discovered inside defied comprehension. 6,577 paintings. Not hundreds, thousands. Van Eyck's Ghent altarpiece, one of the most important works in Western art history. Michelangelo's Madonna of Bruges, smuggled out of Belgium. Masterworks by Vermeer, Rubens and Rembrandt, names that defined European painting for half a millennium. The Rothschild family jewels, even an original score of Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, handwritten by the composer himself. The greatest concentration of artistic treasure ever assembled in one place, hidden beneath a mountain while the world above tore itself apart. But the Nazis had prepared for the possibility of defeat. A regional administrator named August Eigruber had rigged the mine with 8 500-kilogram bombs. If Allied forces approached, he planned to detonate them all, destroying everything rather than letting it fall into enemy hands. The greatest art treasure trove in history was weeks away from becoming the greatest deliberate cultural destruction. Hitler countermanded the order at the last moment. Local miners removed the bombs secretly, defying Eigruber's authority. When American forces finally entered the tunnels, they found the art intact, dusty, cold, and waiting. The recovery that followed would become legend. But here's what the movie didn't tell you. The heroes and the paperwork. The Monuments men catalogued over 1 million art objects through the Munich Central Collecting Point between 1945 and 1949. It remains the largest art recovery operation in history, a logistical achievement that matched the scale of the theft it was meant to undo. They documented provenance, traced ownership, cross-referenced Nazi inventories with pre-war records. Every piece that passed through their hands received a property card noting its origin, condition, and the best available information about who had owned it before the war. Hermann Göring, Göring's former art aide, provided critical intelligence about Althusser's location in exchange for safe passage to Paris. Other Nazi officials traded information for lenient treatment. The Monument's men used every resource available, working against time as evidence scattered and witnesses disappeared. The world celebrated them as heroes, and they were. Without their work, countless irreplaceable pieces would have been lost forever. The Ghent altarpiece returned to Belgium. Michelangelo's Madonna went back to Bruges. Museums across Europe received shipments of recovered treasures. But there was a problem built into the system from the start. The Monument's men returned most art to governments, not to the Jewish families it was stolen from. The theft that came after. France alone received more than 2,100 unclaimed works through the recovery process. Without individual owners stepping forward to claim specific pieces, the art was absorbed into French museums, the Louvre, the Musée d'Orsay, regional collections across the country. No compensation was paid to potential claimants. No serious effort was made to locate heirs. German museums inherited pieces with incomplete provenance documentation. The chaos of the war had destroyed records, scattered families, and erased the paper trails that might have proven ownership. Some museum directors received recovered artworks and returned them, not to dispossessed Jewish owners, but to the families of Nazi leaders who had originally stolen them. The logic was bureaucratic, not moral. If a piece had been in German possession before 1945, it was often treated as German property. The fact that German possession meant Nazi theft didn't always factor into the decision. Many Jewish heirs couldn't prove ownership even when they knew their families had owned specific works. The Nazis had been thorough. They destroyed property records along with the people they murdered. Families that might have produced documentation had been scattered across continents, if they survived at all. The standard of proof required to reclaim stolen property became an impossible burden for people who had already lost everything. A system designed for justice became a mechanism for institutional theft. Governments and museums kept what they received. Heirs were told to produce evidence that no longer existed, and the art stayed where it was. This was the second theft, enacted not by soldiers or occupation administrators, but by lawyers, curators, and civil servants following proper procedures. 80 years and counting. 80 years after the war ended, more than 600 documented restitution cases remain in the pipeline. Not resolved, pending. Many have been rejected outright. Others have been stalled for decades, while institutions negotiate from positions of power and individual heirs grow old waiting. In 2012, German authorities discovered what became known as the Görlitz Trove, 1,406 artworks worth an estimated $1.4 billion, hidden in a cluttered Munich apartment. Cornelius Görlitz was the son of Hildebrand Görlitz, an art dealer who had worked with the Nazi regime. For 7 decades, the collection had been hiding in plain sight, unseen and uncatalogued, while families searched for art they would never find. Many pieces in the Görlitz Trove connected directly to Göring's and Hitler's collections. Works that had passed through Nazi hands, been purchased under duress, or simply confiscated without pretense. The discovery made international headlines and revealed how much stolen art might still be circulating, unidentified and unrecovered. The Guelph treasure presents an even more troubling case. These medieval gold reliquaries were purchased from Jewish dealers in 1935 for dramatically below market prices, sales made under the shadow of Nazi persecution, when Jewish families had no real choice but to accept whatever they were offered. The heirs have been fighting German museums for 90 years. The case continues today. Germany has no binding restitution legislation. Each case is negotiated individually. Museums control the art, the records, and the resources to litigate indefinitely. Individual heirs are vulnerable, often elderly, frequently under-resourced, and dependent on the goodwill of institutions that have strong financial incentives to delay. Many claimants die waiting. Their children inherit the cases. The art stays in the museums. The map of what's gone. The exact number of missing Göring artworks remains unknown. The handwritten inventory tells us what he stole, but it doesn't tell us what survived the war, what was recovered, and what remains lost. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of Nazi-looted pieces are still unaccounted for globally. Some sit in private collections, their provenance deliberately obscured. Others linger in museum storage, uncatalogued and unstudied. Many were simply destroyed. The Munich Central Collecting Point created roughly 170,000 property cards during the recovery operation. A significant portion of those cards lack clear outcomes. The art was documented, the resolution wasn't. Göring's inventory was meant to catalogue a collection. Instead, it catalogues an absence, a room-by-room record of what was taken and never returned. 2 Renoirs in the dining room, Botticelli above the fireplace. The entries read like a decorator's notebook, but they document something far darker. The collection was recovered. The justice never was. Thanks for watching History Hangover. If you found this video insightful, check out our other deep dives into the hidden legacies of World War II. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next upload.